Hi, Pixie Cat kitties. It's me, Pixie Cat, coming at you with a book. This book is my favorite. As you can tell, I'm going to be doing a dramatic reading from Generation Dead by Daniel Waters. And yes, the dead cheerleader. At the back it has boots, so that's what the front looks like. She dead. She beyond dead. Hence Generation Dead. Oh, swirly and pretty. Okay, so this has been my favorite book for a while. And there is no general premise on the back, usually what the book is about and stuff like that. So I'm just gonna jump on into it with chapter 1. Every video of this will be a chapter video. The chapters are generally first chapter is 13 pages long. So, chapter 1. Phoebe and her friends held their breath as the dead girl in the plaid skirt walked past their table into the lunchroom. Her motion kicked up a cool, trailing breeze that seemed to settle on the skin and catch in their hair. As they watched her go by, Phoebe could almost tell what everyone was thinking. Everyone, that is, except for the dead girl. Across from her, Margie shook her head, her silver teardrop earrings dancing among the bright pink spikes of her hair. Even I don't wear skirts that short, she said before sipping her milk. Thank God for that, Adam said, who was 2 seats away. Phoebe risked a glance back at the girl and her long, bluish-white legs. Fluorescent lights were kind to the dead, making them seem like they had been carved from the veinless blocks of pure white marble. The girl went to the furthest table and sat down alone, without any food. The dead always did that during lunch. Sometimes Phoebe used to joke that she possessed psychic powers. Not useful ones like being able to tell when small children have fallen into wells or anything. More like being able to foresee what her mother was making for dinner or how many bangles Margie was going to wear on her arms that day. She thought her powers, if that's what they were more telepathic than telepathic. Phoebe knew as soon as she got her... Restart that sentence. Phoebe knew as soon as she saw that dead girl in the short skirt that would get Margie rolling on a whole host of zombie-related topics, none of which she really wanted to discuss. I heard that Tommy Williams' eye fell out in homeroom, Margie said on cue. I heard that he sneezed or something, and there it went, splat, on his desk. Zombies... Phoebe swallowed and placed her exiled sandwich back on the wax paper wrapping it came in. Zombies don't sneeze, Adam said around a mouthful of meatball sub. Zombies don't breathe, so they can't sneeze. The girls lowered their heads and looked around to see who was in earshot of Adam's booming voice. Zombie was a word he just didn't say in public anymore, even if you were the center of the football team. Air hissed through Margie's teeth. You weren't supposed to call them zombies, Adam. He shrugged his massive shoulders. Zombies, deadheads, corpsicles, what's the difference? They don't care. They don't have feelings to hurt. Phoebe wondered if Tommy Williams and the girl in the plaid skirt really didn't have any feelings. The scientists weren't clear on that point yet. She tried to imagine how she would feel losing an eye, especially losing an eye in public. And in a homeroom, no less. You could be expelled for saying things like that, Adam, Margie was saying. You know you're supposed to call them living impaired. Adam snorted his mouthful of milk. 10 years ago, a milk snort would have been the height of biological grotesquerie at Oakvale High. Today it seemed kind of lame next to losing an eye in homeroom. Living impaired, Adam commented after recovering. I think you two are living impaired. They're just dead. That's so mean. He stood up, his huge body casting a long shadow over their uneaten lunches, and brought his empty tray to the conveyor system that took all the dishes and garbage away. Phoebe just looked at her beautiful egg salad sandwich and wished that she had any desire left to eat it. Phoebe's locker popped open on her third try. She figured that her inability to remember a three-digit combination did not bode well for her impending algebra class, which was always right after lunch. Her stomach rumbled as she tried to tell herself that the spikes of hunger would give her mind an alert sharpness, like a lynx in the winter between successful hunts. Yeah, right, she thought. Tommy Williams was in her algebra class. The door to her locker shook with a metallic vibrating sound. Inside were pictures of bands like the Creeps, the Killdeads, Seraphim Shade, the Rosedales, Slipknot, and the Misfits. Bands that dressed like the living dead before they were any actually living. There was a picture of her, Margie, and Colette in happier times, all gothed up in black fabrics, eyeliners, and boots outside the Cineplex in Winifred, ready to be the first in line for the premiere of some vitally important horror movie she couldn't even remember. Phoebe, the tallest, was in the middle, her long black hair hiding one side of her naturally pale face, and her visible eye closed as she laughed at whatever vulgar comment Margie had just made. Colette had down her eyes like an Egyptian goddess, with a single thick line made up on each corner. Colette and Margie were also laughing. There was also a picture of her dog Gargoyle. Gar was a Welsh terrier, and not half as frightening as his name would suggest. A mirror on the door opposite was on the door opposite the shelf where Phoebe's algebra book lay. Her mouth was a streak of smeared violet lipstick. Her long hair, normally jet black, shiny, spiky, and tousled, now just looked dull, flat, and messy, like this hot mess. The lipstick smear was the only flaw that seemed fixable, so she rubbed it away before walking towards Miss Rodriguez's class, down at the end of the hallway. She arrived there at the same time as Tommy Williams, whose eyes, she was relieved to see, were still fixed within their sockets. He gazed at her with the blank stare of the living impaired. Phoebe felt like cold feathers were dancing along her spine. The stare was bottomless. It made her think that she could fall forever into his eyes, or that he could see right through the very heart of her. Could he see her wondering if his eyes popped out in Homecoming? Or in Homeroom? Not Homecoming, what the heck? Ooh, Homecoming is coming up later in this book. But anyways, Tommy motioned for her to precede him into the room. She held her breath as he lifted her arms, realizing it only because another one of her essential life functions had ceased, namely her heartbeat. She smiled at him. That was a reflex. Courtesy was not very common in the halls of Oakvale High. She stepped into the room, and as she did, she was almost certain that Tommy was trying to smile back at her. Wasn't there some familiar faint upturn of the lips at one corner of his mouth, or the briefest flash of light in the flat, undead eyes? She took her seat, breathing again, heart beating again. Not only beating, but beating fast. She didn't know much about Tommy Williams. She knew he'd come to Oakvale High last May, just a few weeks before school had let out. Oakvale was starting to get a reputation for having a good living impaired program. Good enough that families with living impaired kids were moving to Oakvale from the surrounding area. Phoebe's father had pointed out the article in the Winford Bulletin that Oakvale High's living impaired population had doubled in a year. There was at least 7 in her class and about 120. Or of about 120. Oh my god, it's not a living dead, kids. Algebra was not a subject that Phoebe could struggle with. Algebra was not a subject that Phoebe struggled with. She usually completed the next day's assignment while Miss Rodriguez started to probe for answers among her slower, struggling classmates. Algebra was a class she could drift in and out with in the way of music from a car passing will drift into an open bedroom window. She wondered how Tommy Williams had died. She looked at the back of his head, his gray blonde hair, and her thoughts drifted again to the topic of death. They started with mundane, do living impaired people need get haircuts? The answer, yes. Both hair and fingernails grow during living impairment. And proceeded with the philosophically complex What is it like to be dead? What is it like to be living impaired? These questions had preoccupied Phoebe when she was a young girl, long before the world heard of the living impaired. She looked out the window and tried to think of the time before dead teens began to pick themselves off the mortuary slabs and sick beds. It hadn't been long ago. She was 14 when she saw the first footage of a living impaired person, sitting stiffly between his parents on some CNN talk show. Her parents had always made her leave the room when the Dallas Jones video came on. That video was the Zapruder film of their generation, as it showed Dallas, the original zombie, die and come back to life. A dog trailing a broken leash ran across the field in the opposite classroom window. And Phoebe wondered why living impaired seemed to be a phenomenon exclusive to teenagers. American teenagers specifically. Dogs didn't come back. Neither did monkeys or goldfish or old people or small children. Apparently, neither did teenagers until Uzbekistan, Burkina Faso, Sweden, or Papua New Guinea for some reason. But kids from Oklahoma, Rockaway Beach, the Big Apple, Arkansas, or the Big Easy all bore at least a chance of dwindling up, living impaired. As long as they croaked during the delicate teen years, the newest Frankenstein formula theory was that a certain mixture of teenage hormones and fast food preservatives set up the proper conditions for living impairment. The medical community was still testing the theory, having begrudgingly let go of fluorocarbons and brain patterns rewired by a lifetime of first-person shooter games. I think this book is cool. Outside, the dog lifted a matted hind leg on the bike rack, where a number of bicycles were chained. Do the dead go to the bathroom? They don't need a drink, so the answer would seem to be no. Miss Rodriguez then did something strange enough to interrupt Phoebe's train of thought. She called on Tommy for the answer to a problem, even though his pale hand wasn't raised. Tommy looked up from his papers. There was a pause that sucked the air out of the classroom. There was always a pause like that when the dead were called on. The dead could think, they could communicate, they could reason, and once in a blue moon, one might even initiate a conversation. But they did so, very, very slowly. A question, even one as simple as one from Miss Rodriguez, to take a living impaired person 10 minutes to process, and another 5 to respond. It's like it's taking me 10 minutes to read one sentence. Phoebe covertly tried to gauge the reaction of her classmates. Some were suddenly absorbed into their textbooks, doing anything to avoid the reality, or unreality, that the dead kid represented. Others, like Pete Martinsburg, who was taking Algebra 1 for the second time, and who was normally only interested in football and girls, were rapt with attention. Pete was looking at Tommy with the same expression of manic glee that he wore when he tripped Norm Lathrop and sent him sprawling into banks of big rubber garbage cans in the lunchroom last week. Hi, Wilson! Sorry, my dog's in here. He's a cutie. 174, Tommy said, his voice halting without inflection. No one hearing his voice could tell if Tommy thought his answer was wrong or right. So most of the class looked at Miss Rodriguez for her reaction. She looked pleased. That is correct, Thomas. Phoebe noticed that she always called on living impaired kids by their formal first names. It wasn't something she did with normal kids. Pete Martinsburg was just Pete, when she called his name, which was often and usually to reprimand him. Phoebe was secretly thrilled that the leer smacked off Pete's face. Miss Rodriguez went on with the class, like it was no big deal to call on a dead kid. For the most part, the rest of the class reacted the same way. But Phoebe noticed that Tommy did not go back to looking at his paper. His head remained high for the remainder of class. Margie was waiting for her at the door of algebra. How did you get here so quickly? Phoebe asked Margie, with her arm pulled with her asked Margie took her arm and pulled her aside. Shh! I've mastered the art of bilocation. I'm heading off to my English class right now. Phoebe laughed. Me too. Let's go. Hold on! I want to see that living impaired kid for a minute. Whoever told you about the eye thing was yanking your chain. He still has both, Phoebe whispered, and then Tommy walked out the classroom, the last one to leave. I've got something even bigger. I heard he signed up for football tryouts. He's supposed to start practice tomorrow. Phoebe looked at her friend, just wondering how it was that Marge always knew what was going on with the dead kids. Don't look at me like that, Phoebes. I overheard Coach Conrathy arguing with Principal Kim. He wasn't going to let the dead kid try out. But Kim is making him. Really? Really. Can you imagine that? Playing with a living dead kid? Having to shower with them? Brr. Did dead kids have to shower? They weren't rotting corpses like in all the movies, and they didn't sweat either. Phoebe didn't think they smelled like anything. At least they didn't smell like anything dead. He looks like he could play, Phoebe said, watching him make his patient way down the hall. What do you mean? Well, he's built for it. Phoebe! Margie said, making a face. Ick! He is. He's really, sort of handsome. Yeah, if he wasn't, dead, Margie said. Double ick. Come on, we have to get to class. What about biolocation? I think they mean biology. I don't know. I can't do it when someone's asking me a bunch of questions. Let's go! Phoebe made one stop after the final bell before she went to the bus. Adam was methodically stacking books into his locker, lifting half the stack with one big hand. Hey, she said. I heard that a corpsicle is going up for your precious football team. Yeah? He said, not looking up from his task. Whatever, as long as he can play. Yeah? Sorry, I thought we were the same sentence. Huh? Phoebe smiled. She thought it was cute the way Adam tried to be all gruff around her. She wondered if he even knew he was doing it. Listen, she said. Would you be able to give me a lift home tomorrow? I want to stay and get some work done in the library. Sure, as long as you can wait till practice is over, he said, pushing his locker close. As long as the STD doesn't take away my driving privileges. STD was Adam's term of endearment for his stepdad, who he got along with about as well as he did with Winterford's Academy defensive line, which means not at all. Pretty much like me and my dad. Anyways, great, she said. See you. I'll see you. I gotta catch my bus. Adam nodded. If he really did have an option one way or another about playing football with living impaired, he didn't show it. Adam had matured a lot over the summer. Maybe it was the karate. Is Daffy coming? Phoebe laughed. Adam was more mature around everyone other than Daffy, his nickname for Margie. I don't think so. Okay, see you. Later. She watched him walk away. She'd known Adam since she'd moved next door to him years ago. But he was different now. In the way he walked, in the way he talked, in the way his face slimmed down to reveal stronger, angular drawn lines. His upper half, always big, had broadened out into a wide V from his narrow waist. Phoebe had smiled to herself. If it was the karate, it was a good thing. She almost missed her bus home. Charlotte was already sitting alone, staring ahead out the windshield. Phoebe saw her, and the familiar pang of sadness and shame flared inside her chest. Oh, excuse me, Colette, not Charlotte. Phoebe had grown up with Colette Beauvoir, at least until Colette stopped growing when she'd drawn an Oxoboxo lake the previous summer. Colette would be 15 forever, and yet she was not the same 15 she used to be. Phoebe had tried to talk to her once. The experience had gone so disturbing she'd never tried again. That was months ago. Margie was even worse. She'd get up from her seat and leave if Colette entered the room. As Gabby as Margie was, she couldn't bear to discuss what happened to Colette. The dead always sat alone. The school dismissed them 5 minutes early so they would have time to shuffle out to the buses. Every day since Colette died, Phoebe would pass her sitting there all alone and wonder if she remembered the fun they used to have listening to Colette's brother, Old Kier, Dead Kennedys, records in the basement. Colette was the first word Phoebe had said since her said to her since the one failed conversation. The memory of her tears still felt fresh in Phoebe's mind. Colette turned, and Phoebe liked to think that the sound of her name and was just not caused her to turn. She regarded Phoebe with a fixed, blank stare. Phoebe considered sliding into the seat next to the dead girl, her mouth opened to say what? How sorry was she? How much she missed her? She lost her nerve and moved towards the back of the bus where Margie was. Whatever words she'd hoped to say got caught in her throat. Colette's head turned back slowly, like a door on a rusty hinge. Margie was engrossed in her iPod, or at least she was pretending to be. Colette was like a dark spot on a sun to Margie. She never spoke about her or even acknowledged that she existed. "Did you hear the bass player at the Grave Mistake died?" she said. "Heart attack after overdosing on heroin." "Oh," Phoebe said, wiping her eye. "You think he'll come back?" Margie shook her head. "I think he's too old, like 22 or 23. "That's unfortunate," Phoebe said. "I guess we'll know in a couple days." Tommy Williams was the last one on the bus. There were plenty of open seats. Tommy stopped at Colette's seat. He looked at her, and then he sat down right beside her. That's weird, Phoebe thought. She was going to say so to Margie, but Margie was intent on her iPod and trying furiously not to think about the dead friend. And that is the end of Chapter 1 of Generation Dead. This is Pixie Cat signing off until next time, and I will see you guys later. Bye!